Hello, I'm Josh Baer, and welcome to the Baer Faxt podcast. Just a couple of days into my tour of the Middle East, I met with Mohammed Hafiz, co-founder of the ATHR Gallery and the ATHR Foundation in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. By the way, they have galleries across the region, to sort of give us the scoop on the Gulf region's art scene, in particular what's going in Saudi Arabia. It was quite an interesting conversation for an outsider like me to see how the region has grown, is growing, and might grow into a central art destination for the Gulf. Of course, with great change comes great challenges that gallerists and curators are now facing. Now, while I'm known to have an opinion or two or three, the goal of this trip was to step back, listen, and learn. We certainly learned, and I learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope you do too. This episode is brought to you by ATHR Analytics. Hey, everybody in the Gulf region, especially who may be listening for the first time to our show. This is the only platform that you need online to really master the art of collecting. So they have data on over 900,000 artists and 20,000 galleries in over 12,000 cities around the globe. ATHR Analytics gives you really the best tools for collecting from anywhere in the world as a data center, and you can get it on the web or on your mobile devices. And for our listeners, there's a free trial, no commitment required at this point. It's going to be on a paywall soon, so better check it out now at arthuranalytics.com/BaerFaxt. Check it out. Obviously, you have to finish listening to this whole episode. Don't check it out this minute, but like in an hour. Here we are, my first time in Riyadh, the first time in Saudi Arabia, and I went to the person that everybody said, he was the go-to guy about the art world and the art market and in this country. So 15 years of having a gallery here, Mohammed. What's the difference now from this crazy idea you started in 2009?
Big difference. When we started, art was around. Collectors were buying and some were collecting. Patrons were supporting, but we were lacking an ecosystem. And what we're seeing now is this kind of ecosystem coming together. The government is hugely supporting. The museums are opening. The auction houses are coming. The international dealers are showing in Art Week Riyadh. The biennials in its I think third edition for the contemporary and the second in Islamic. The Light Festival, Noor Riyadh's been around. So there is so much activity that's happening around art in Saudi since we first started.
So in 2009, how many clients would you say the gallery had versus how many would you say you're working with now? What's been the scope of the growth?
I don't know, maybe tenfolds.
And we'll get back to some of the financials and prices, tenfold. Or
some artists tenfolds, yeah. The ones that started early on, yeah, I think more than tenfolds. Because the interest is not only Saudi. Some artists start with Saudi interest and then that kind of expands internationally. And some artists starts from the international side and come to Saudi.
So do you think there's a distinctly Saudi art versus maybe a more international art by some Saudi artists?
Definitely.
How would you describe then what is Saudi art? And then we'll get to the international element.
What an interesting and difficult question, Josh. I'll start with the second one, the international one, because it seems more kind of logical. And it's the progression of artists that start in their local context. They probably succeed in the local context. And then they start showing in museums or biennials or international exhibitions or art fairs, and they're engaging with the international collectors and curators. And the reaction from the wider art world kind of takes them from that context. They evolve from doing something that is maybe focused on local materialities, local subjects, local ideations. In isolation from that art historical narrative that possibly they can find a place within it. And we've seen some artists like Mohammed Shono, Ahmed Mater, Dan Awartani, Manal Al-Duwayan, to name a few, who kind of are carving their space within this international art historical narrative, and some others who are working their way towards it, and some who kind of all their careers are going to be working in a local context and engaging with it and won't be able to break into that narrative.
So the local context, let's go back to my first question of like trying to set the table and define it. I mean, certainly what you're allowed to do as an artist has changed.
Yes. I think what you are allowed to do as an artist has evolved. And artists within the Saudi context kind of appeared with an interesting angle because they didn't only consider what they're allowed to do or not allowed to do from a legal standpoint, but it was also how the general public reacts to their work. And they've been very sensitive in putting forward some interesting questions, yet being quite subtle about it. And that has been a thread within a lot of the work that have generated international interest.
From the reading I'd done, I was less prepared for the art I saw, maybe because writing was done a year ago or something like that, about how imagery is allowed to be used. I'm not saying that necessarily artists weren't doing it, but being able to exhibit it might be a differentiating point. But the culture seems more open, at least on the surface. I've been here 3 days, and I don't consider myself an expert yet.
It is opening up. And I think social boundaries and norms of any society, there are subjects that generate backlash. Different subjects generate different backlashes in different parts of the world. So if talking about one thing is kind of fine in, let's say, in Italy or the US, might not be fine here. And things that you talk about here might not be fine there. So it's kind of
I'm thinking about the Maurizio Catalan sculpture of the Pope crushed by a meteor shown in the Venice Biennale. Whoa, that was like taking something on. So yes, those issues of what's appropriate are globally true, and what's acceptable in one place may not be in another.
And I think in Saudi, because the society was quite closed, these limitations and expectations were very low. And when society opens up, and when you're also dealing with a very young population, in a time where everyone's on their phones looking at TikToks and Instagrams and sharing very similar expectations and life experiences, whether it's on a screen or physically. And I think the world is getting closer, and the expectations and the norms are very similar.
Well, was it more that it was closed off for us to come in, and that actually Saudis who had, whether they were artists or were more privileged, were leaving and seeing the culture outside, going to boarding school in England, going to the Louvre? The information may have been restricted, but you were able to travel and go see things. What was your first art experience you remember outside of this country?
My first art experience outside this country, I honestly don't remember. But my first kind of professional art experience was a visit to Art Dubai in 2007.
I think I was there that year.
You were?
Yes.
It was kind of the height of the art market in Dubai, and there was a lot of activity around Middle Eastern artists and Indian artists, and it was a big hype that year.
I'm from New York. Tell us about your experiences showing in international art fairs, and particularly in the States.
They were interesting experiences. I've heard you talk about how art fairs were a marketing tool when you had your own gallery, and you were comparing them to putting some ads in magazines. And we've gone through that experience. And our participations in the Armory show were mostly driven by that concept. Let's go to the States. We're going to pay the shipping, go there, spend some time, meet people, and maybe something comes out of it. So we did the Armory show for 3 or 4 years. One of the years we had an amazing coverage from the New York Times. We had an image of the booth. They reviewed it very positively, and we didn't sell a single artwork in that participation.
That reminds me that back in ancient times when I had a gallery, a review in the New York Times could make or break sales.
Yeah.
So if Roberta Smith said, wow, that show's not very good, people would cancel sales. And if she wrote about some show, someplace collectors would run to it, and it had a direct financial impact on collectors. And I would agree that that's no longer the case.
I agree too. And I've experienced that firsthand. It was great publicity, a lot of curators and good conversations happened that year, but no transactions.
Well, what about a review of a show here in the Middle East? Does it drive traffic? Does it drive sales? Does art criticism matter here? Hardly matters anymore.
I think, again, we go back to how the art world is a very, very small world. It's a small planet. And what works in one place, I think, would work in another. So we haven't seen impact of critique on sales. But I think what we've seen impact in sales is artists showing in the biennials, in the light festivals, in Desert X, and some of these bigger events and exhibitions.
So what is the scale of sales now versus year one, would you say? And we'll get into other models of business, but for just the top line sales, 2024 versus 2009.
Definitely the sales now are much more than what they were in 2007. Artists were more accessible, less expensive when they first started, or when we first started, and when they had maybe smaller CVs and less international exposure and participation and maybe less secondary market data points. And now they have more of that in their biographies and CVs. You can go on ArtNet and check some of the artists' secondary market results. So the dynamics are changing. But another very important point that happened is being in Saudi in this kind of art and cultural renaissance. We see a lot of commissioning happening from the government, the Ministry of Culture, the cities themselves. And these are driving the sales and giving us amazing opportunities and artists, some of the opportunities to create and realize some of their wildest dreams. You've been to Ahmed Mater's studio and you saw his Ashhab al-Lal installation that's planned to be built in Al-Ula next to Heiser and Turel. And these impact the artists' financials and they impact ours as well as a gallery that works with these artists. And, you know, when you compare sales at that time, that element of commissioning didn't exist. And with a program from Riyadh Art driven by the Royal Commission of the city, when they've publicly announced they want to commission more than 1,000 public installations around the city in the coming years, that's a major impact for us, of course, and for the art market as a whole, because you can't commission 1,000 Saudi artists. And we've seen international artists coming into these competitions. They have a program for art in the metro stations, in the big roundabouts and around the city.
Hopefully no big cause installations. There's enough of them in other parts of Asia, and let's hope that's less the case. So you're saying the bulk of the business is less people walking in and buying a two-dimensional picture on the wall.
It happens, and it's part of our revenue. But when your most demanded artists are engaged with their wildest, biggest dreams,
they're not so much in the studio making this sort of like a souvenir shop kind of ways to support themselves.
So it's a kind of a balance. And with many artists, we're quite aware of how that impacts their career and practice. And we're trying to find the balance between both.
Well, there was always a battle back in my days, again, the OG days on commissions, with whether the galleries should take any of that money, because the artists tend to think, well, the baseball stadium came to me and I wrote the proposal, and so I should keep all the money. And the galleries were a little bit like, well, they only came to you because of the exhibitions we put on, so they even know about your work for being in museum shows and all that. That was always a tough argument. Now that's 25, 30 years ago. I wonder what's changed, if anything.
Nothing. As if you were sitting with me in each one of these discussions. Nothing has changed. I can see where the artist is coming from, but I think some of the artists see where we're coming from. And it's a constant battle and discussion. And seeing the value of a 10-year investment or a 15-year investment in an artist's career and where they've went and where they've shown, and the end result of getting that commission.
I would say, you might not know this, but in some countries in Europe, when an artist leaves the gallery, they have to pay the gallery, even though they're all even up in terms of sales, because the Dutch law says, well, and Dutch law protects the bourgeois shopkeeper. So it's like an old-fashioned kind of thing. It's like, well, they built all these shows, so you're going to have to keep paying them, even though you may have switched from Gallery X in Amsterdam to Guggenheim Gallery. There's the courts say, well, Gallery X still has to be paid.
I'm definitely looking up that law.
You do look up at this, and if the artists leave,
then we get paid in perpetuity, no?
Yes, it's almost like a royalty
in
a certain way, I guess. Royalty meaning a different thing than it does here.
Yeah.
Keep listening for part 2 of Josh Baer's conversation with Mohammed Hafiz, where Hafiz discusses Saudi Arabia's unique approach to public-private collaboration in the gallery system and how art fairs have served as a unique gateway to Europe and beyond.
As we've said, Arthur Analytics can be your platform for following the art world online. Let's say you just landed in, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, and you want to know what's going on in, I don't know, Riyadh. But you don't, like me, you had no idea where to start. Open up Arthur Analytics on your phone, type in Riyadh, and there you go. A gallery map, event listings, all in detail, and more. Is there an artist you're interested in? There's information there to tap on and go through their market data and their news. So you can scour the web for listings and events on your own, or have the world at your fingertips. So next time you're out, you can be like ready to roll. So start with arthuranalytics.com/Baer Faxt to get your free trial. Again, wait till the podcast's over, then it's coming, but let's get to the rest of our show. I want to get into in general, the models of the gallery system and the auction and art fair system. We were talking about COVID. So 2020, 2021, probably were the most profitable periods, surprisingly, for art galleries, maybe ever. Was it the same here?
No, it wasn't the same here. And I heard that in one of your conversations. And I thought, why wasn't it? And I think in your part of the world, the galleries were around for a long time. They have their collectors. The collectors know what they want. The artists were there. They had their exhibitions and bios and CVs or set up. And the collectors knew what they wanted and they were waiting to get it. When they were sitting at home, like you mentioned, browsing through these PDFs, and the galleries were sitting around doing nothing, managing their costs and going to those collectors that have shown interest, probably that's why. When I reflect on our market here, we're still building a collector base, which you have seen with the event that we're experiencing this week. We're trying to grow this collector base. Art is not widely collected. And we were together in a panel about who's a collector. And I think it's a big question. It's a big word to be a collector. Maybe you're an art buyer. You're like this work or that work. And it was still too early for us to make money out of COVID, I think.
So what did you do?
I took a job in the Ministry of Culture that didn't last long. And when things started coming back to life and saw the potential with all the different projects happening in Saudi and being, I would say, one of the main galleries in the market, I thought that letting go of that would really be a big kind of drawback to the whole evolution. I love my artists and I feel responsible towards them and their careers. It's kind of the emotional bit of it. A dealer's a dealer, but you kind of develop these very special relationships with human beings that are adding something really unique to the world we live in. And it didn't feel right to just jump ship and let it be. So I came back and we had 3 of the most successful years in our career. But they were successful because we focused on the artists' careers and their works and their markets. And we had amazing, participations in international fairs. But we also decided to pivot our business and look into what the government is doing and what the public sector is doing and engaging with that as a service provider. There are so many strategies being thought of in different government agencies and the private sector, PIF companies, acquisitions, commissions, and we're engaging more with these kind of opportunities that we feel are very unique to this part of the world.
Well, are they unique to this part of the world? We've been talking particularly with the Jeff Poe podcast. And if you haven't seen those, I suggest our audience go listen to them again about the gallery model sort of being broken. If you could go a little bit further into what you do beyond just put it up on the wall, sell it, pay the artist. Let's say US and European galleries be thinking about alternative roles that they can play in business. And one last comment, you said you took a job.
Yeah.
Running a gallery is a job.
Yeah. I took a job as in someone paid me a salary.
Okay. It's a hobby, I suppose.
Yeah.
The tax law would say if you don't ever make any money, in America they call that a hobby. But the kind of advisory work that's not just buy this art, do you think that, other than maybe the mega galleries, that might be a way to go if you're a gallery in Chicago or San Francisco or Munich?
I think the statement that you just said about the gallery system being broken is quite interesting. And the evolution and pivot that any dealer or gallerist or business person should consider is, I think, pivoting into something requires agility and flexibility. It helped us because we're not from a very structured art world system. So it's not like these people do that and these do the other thing. It's a very new scene and a new market. And we've decided to be very adventurous and experimental.
Well, explain more what that means in some examples, because I understand the sentence you're saying. I think it's hard for us to visualize what that entails.
So, in the public sector, for example, the Art Week that we're experiencing now is an initiative by the Saudi Visual Arts Commission. This initiative is conceived by the Visual Arts Commission. It's drafted in what we call an RFP, a request for a proposal, and it's floated for different companies to respond on how to deliver it, build it, run it, put the ushers on board, ship the work, hang the work, fly you in, deliver the whole experience. It's not done by the ministry itself. They conceive it and they send this out to companies, to event companies sometimes to respond to. And we've decided to be one of the companies. We've actually incorporated a company, hired a team that sits very closely to the gallery team that responds to these kind of tenders. If the city of Riyadh wants to build a ginormous sculpture, we could be the gallery that's putting the artist forward, but we could be the company that's fabricating the work of this artist that we don't represent, because the fabrication of the work is an independent business opportunity that you bid for, and your capabilities and your pricing and all your terms and conditions, you're bidding with 3 or 4. It's like a contracting job, let's say.
But does it keep then your expenses down? Tell me you have 45 people on staff, which they probably at pay scale less than in New York, but it's still, they're able to multitask. So you have to be able to work on the gallery exhibit, but also these other events things that people, or is everybody segmented?
Our support services are shared. So the financing, IT, HR, logistics, these are shared, but the core competencies are separated, though some crosses happen.
Certainly as the fearless leader, you're doing both.
Yeah.
So the question is, should galleries be thinking, whether they're in the Lower East Side or the mega minors or whatever terminology you want to use. I think it really is time to be thinking of alternative structures. And it's interesting to look at a new area, a new place, and to learn from it rather than just think you should learn from how Lehman Mopin does it or Metro Pictures did it, that we could actually not just be the model, but we should maybe be the student.
It's definitely a two-way street. And in our situation, it was a product of necessity.
necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly.
Can you say that in Arabic for us?
الحاجة أم الاختراع.
I agree.
It wasn't like a luxury. Like we're sitting there selling artworks by the dozens and thinking, how can we increase our revenues and profit? It was coming from a place of necessity. It was a question of survival.
Well, you had the advantage also of a government and a decision to lean into it. I would say in the West, certainly in America now, there's a concrete desire to lean out of the arts. Now, that might be its own opportunity.
That might create another opportunity. But again, flexibility, agility, and openness to explore beyond the system that we're familiar with.
So you're advocating for gallerists to be flexible, adventurous, and open?
Yeah, and agile.
Oh, man. That's a big,
a big ask.
Because actually from the inside, the art world's pretty conservative and prudish. Doesn't like change.
Yeah.
I have to say, in a way, I really admire Mark Glimcher and Pace because they try things.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes it might end in a spectacular NASCAR crash, but they do think outside the envelope. The art world's not too...
And just stopping by the Mark Glimcher Pace situation, years ago, I had this random call with Mark, like, oh, I'm interested in this part of the world. What do you think we can do together? And I said, I think there's a lot of opportunities. And he goes, okay, I'm coming in 3 days. And he gets on a plane. He's here. We're talking about a lot of opportunities. And he was one of the first mega galleries to decide and engage with this part of the world. And as a result, we've opened a mega, massive, iconic Team Lab museum. And our James Turrell project is with Wadi al-Fan is in play. And these wouldn't have happened without Mark's adventurous, really kind of openness towards experimentation. And with other galleries, we're finding it a bit challenging, but everyone does their thing and does what works for them. But one point I want to go back to is when we pivoted into this life-saving business venture, it's very dangerous because you still have your gallery, your artists, your exhibitions, and your art fairs. And it does create, we lost track and we focused on one and maybe neglected the other. And we had to do some aggressive restructuring and reorientation to make sure that we're focused on the gallery and the artists and their career and practice, and not to lose that focus and follow something that might not be a long-term vision, because our main focus is the gallery. I think this is where we want to be identified with 20, 30 years from now.
How important is it for the gallery and for the artist to get identified with and I guess branded in some way with like Art Basel? And so let's move into the art fair model. Is that broken? I was saying the other day, you might say that it's necessary. You might have often said, I'd say it's evil. You might say it's a necessary evil or evil necessity. What's your experiences beyond the Armory, but in your view of the art fairs, their costs, the wins and losses there as a gallerist?
The art fairs are very important. I want to kind of a disclaimer saying these are my personal views. Some people might agree or disagree. It's again my personal experience. So sharing that with you and everyone who's listening. Now, thinking about a gallery in our part of the world, we need exposure to the more kind of established art systems and markets, be it Basel, London, Paris, or New York. And that is important because we want to show face there. And we've done that in all of these cities and kind of took us a step back and looked at the different cities we want to develop in and decided that we want to focus on Europe because that's closer. I can go there quite often, meet the collectors. My team can go there and we want to stay there because US is a bit of a stretch and it's highly competitive. And parachuting for 3 days in a market and then disappearing for 360 doesn't make sense.
But that's why some of the galleries have opened 10 locations.
Because
they have a footprint.
You want a footprint. You want to stay top of mind. And we all know that, we live in a world where people shop online, but luxury brands are opening bigger, nicer, more impressive shops because they want to be there in your face. And then you see it, you remember it, and you go on your phone and buy whatever you want from them. So again, that visibility is very important. And the visibility in a very prestigious situation or with the right neighbors is very important, because the human mind makes these associations. If you're in Basel, then the associations are with these selected galleries. And if you're in what we call them, the offshoot fairs, you're associated with the galleries there. So again, very important. Sales in the art fairs, we're learning. We're not the oldest gallery. We're learning how to do it. We're learning how to pre-sell and engage with our collectors and make sure they're around.
Well, you have an inherent advantage in Art Basel, for instance, because they need to be global.
Yes.
So there are, I don't know, 600 galleries in New York City. So there's going to be like, well, I don't get in just because I'm from, New York City. But they do want, so if you're from Stuttgart, if you're from Jeddah, you have a certain inherent thing because they're trying to encourage people from your community to go. It's not quite a DEI thing, but it sort of is. And I would accept that. And
we accept it.
And lean into it. It's like, okay, we have an advantage. Let's use it.
Exactly. And we kind of feel it from some of the fairs, because you definitely want the diversity to appeal to the international collector and buyer and to explore new possibilities and options.
But is the expense model for the galleries doing the fair kind of like, I ran into a major gallerist at the airport lounge in New York, and he said, listen, it's like $250,000 to $350,000 a fair. They do 10 or 12 of them. That's now they can afford that risk and they generally do well, but imagine a smaller gallery taking $100,000 loss. It can put them pretty close to the edge of business.
It is very challenging, and it's very difficult to break even in a fair at our size.
Because the booth costs the same, relatively speaking.
The hotel costs the same, the ticket costs the same, and we're air shipping. We're not in Europe. We don't have a post around where you put them on a truck and ship them. So we have to fly everything to any fair we go to except the ones in the region. So that's a huge cost that we have to factor. But we looked at how to P&L those fairs. Because if I take that P&L of the week, I go and come back with a very bright red light at the bottom of that P&L. But we look at what happens 6 months later. Who are those collectors that we met? And how can we maybe sell them something else or meet them somewhere else? And,
let's talk about the other galleries that see your work. I mean, is it important for you representing an artist here to have them represented in London or New York by another gallery? Or is that, I'm going to get cut out and, they're going to go?
We want them to be represented by other galleries, but we also want them to recognize the time and the effort that we've put into the career when it was not interesting for the other galleries. And we've gone through 3 different experiences. One where the artists get approached by a lot of international galleries, mega galleries, and they're like, we want to stick with you. We don't want co-representation, and let's wait for another 3 or 4 years. We had another example where the artist said, okay, and the gallery as well, let's co-represent. You're the primary, we're the secondary. We're going to recognize you with a small percentage just to say, you've done something for this artist, and we'll work together, hand in hand. Love that. And then you have the one where, oh, really? That gallery? I'm dumping you now. And it's not the nicest situation.
That's why having a gallery is so rough.
Yeah.
As I look back and being a reformed gallerist, the hardest part was managing the artist. Post my period, they became this term, the artist liaison.
Yeah.
And it's like, WTF. I mean, that should be the job of the person name on the door to talk to the artist. Do you have artist liaisons? Or are you the one that talks to each of the artists all the time? And how many artists do you work with?
We work with around 20, and we do have artist liaisons. We have multiple directors in the gallery that talk to artists and do different things. I love talking to artists and meeting with them and spending time with them. But, you only have...
So your CEO role is more managing the directors and the liaisons than managing
the artists.
I think that's been a fundamental shift by growth.
Yeah. In 2009, I was the artist liaison because we were 3 people. and there were 7 or 8 artists.
So you could speak to each one of them.
So I could speak
every other day.
But now it's like, okay, we're delivering this project, we're going to this art fair, we're doing this financials, and it's just,
There's some big artists who've left their galleries in the last few years. I can tell you, I'll find one that never met the owner of the gallery.
Oh, that's not the case. I wouldn't be surprised.
Maybe the gallery role is shifted to being just a sales role. And it used to be a career management role. And there's galleries that manage careers and work on all these exhibitions. And there's other galleries that like, we're selling your work and you manage your career. The artists have different needs. What kind of personality or type of artist you're attracted to? Unfortunately, I was attracted to difficult ones. That seemed to be, as I look back in the sort of Freudian way, not all of them, but in many ways, the ones that I wanted to deal with, Chris Burden is a great artist. And man, he was difficult. Every day he was difficult. Now, that's why I'm glad I don't do it anymore. But I think if a certain amount of introspection is there, like a type of, not just the art, but the artist that you think your gallery says, that's a fit. It's a more personal question.
I won't say difficult, but I think the artists I connect with are the ones that, really challenge me as a person, that, you sit with them and you have this discussion where you leave saying, interesting.
And that can be about politics or
anything,
films or literature or other art. Or their art.
So
also they want to talk about their art.
And, when you're 50.
I can't remember that long ago.
Yeah, I'm getting there in a couple of months. And you're considering signing a 30-year-old artist. It's kind of challenging to be the person who's managing their career.
Well, and I would say,
to a certain extent,
most artists, I think, have a window of time when they're really interested. 2 or 3 years. And then, but if you're representing an artist, it's like, oh my God, I'm building a 20-year relationship. And what are the chances in year 15 that they're still making interesting work? And you're still the person. That's a really difficult position for galleries. That's why a lot of them might have 50 artists on their roster, but they're really 20 of them, they haven't had a show in 8 years.
I've seen that. And I think because we've taken a decision to be more involved with the careers, unless the artist doesn't want that, we kept our roster quite tight and very concise to artists that we feel. And within Saudi and the region, we want to work with artists where we can build a very impactful, sensible career for them. And they appeal to the international market as well.
How about representing here artists from the West?
We did in the past.
And I don't mean Saudi American artists.
No,
or
like
expat.
Western artists.
So we have a new term, Western, and Basel. So second, redundant term. I like it. Western.
Non-Middle Eastern. Let's call them that.
I like Western.
Western. Okay. They could be Eastern though.
Yeah, you could be going, other than I have to remind myself that Saudi Arabia is West Asia.
Yeah.
So you could be Western Eastern, yes.
So yes, we want to look into it. We're looking at regional artists today. Eventually, we want to represent international artists. And I think that will be more informed about how we want to expand our activities. If you look at galleries, mega galleries who show in Basel, Hong Kong, they tap into their West Asian artists to show there because that's more relevant to the market. And if we want to expand more into Europe or US, I think that's going to kind of inform what artists are going to come on board.
Now, where I come from, being an advisor is completely at odds with being a dealer or a gallerist. And there's fiduciary versus non-fiduciary. But maybe that's just one way of looking at it. Do you think of, well, I could also be advising these clients here to go buy their Damien Hirst or their emerging art thing that you saw at NADA in Miami Beach. Is that part of the business model instead of necessarily bringing artists you represent, but transacting for a growing clientele a growing interest in Western art?
It's one of the possibilities. We've done it a very, very few times because again, it represents a very evident conflict. So the buyer is not that comfortable. It's like, you're a gallerist, you represent artists, so I think you're going to be pushing the ones that you're making a bigger margin on. So some collectors have kind of worked with us on some of these deals. The exhibition we have up now in the gallery, one of the shows is a group show where we're showing the international artists that we are closer to and have a good relationship with, and they kind of sit nicely together. And we've done reasonably good sales with some of the collectors.
But that's a fundamentally different thing than saying to your best clients, let me help you with things that, and I'll be transparent. Here's where the invoices are coming from. And they're not artists I work with. And I think there's a tendency in the provincial cities, and that could be, it used to be Los Angeles, San Francisco, where the dealers thought that they had to really tag their collectors for them. And they were in intense competition with the gallery across the street. Now, in New York, you sort of recognize like marketplace is huge. No one can control those major collectors. So there's no way that you should be able to say, well, the only interesting art you could ever find are my 20 artists. And I think that there's an argument that you could make. It's, listen, I believe in these. I'm managing their career. They're great. I think you should buy them. But that's not all there is in the world. Absolutely. And there's no way that any one gallery, even Marion Goodman or Gagosian, can say, you should only shop with us. Yeah. But we've developed a relationship with you. And Gagosian opened their own art advisory. And Sotheby's bought an art advisory company, recognizing that there's a need from the clientele to have access and knowledge beyond the fine work you do. So
I see where you're coming from, and I agree. But you've mentioned something in your panel yesterday about the art world experience and Studio 54 and the red rope, and, you know, the ability to go beyond that and belong to this world. I think collectors in this part of the world are enjoying the journey and experience of belonging to that world. If you come as an art advisor in between and remove the experience and just give them the product.
Well, I think, yeah, part of it is like giving them the experience.
Yes.
Too. So you have to allow them to like go and be standing there with that curator or dealer and not be threatened by it, that you're still.
They still want to go to the fairs. They want to go to the parties, to the dinners. They want to engage with that. And I think it's an integral part of being an art advisor.
But I think that could be another segment that you could do. I mean, I met a lot of people in 3 days who say they're art advisors here. And you don't meet them. It's interesting when you're in China, Hong Kong, they're very few and they're not very well respected. Now, I don't know if these people I met are what we call gmail.com advisors, or they're serious advisors with a big business. It seems to not be a pejorative term in the Middle East.
But I think those art advisors are going to figure out, like we started the gallery and we figured out what a gallery is, like by engaging with other galleries and artists and fairs and what have you. And you can label yourself whatever you want. And then you walk into the real world and start figuring out how that evolves for you.
I'll tell you a funny story. So this project in Alula, one of the main curators or people involved is Alan Schwartzman, right? You know Alan?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. He's a big deal, right? When I went to open my gallery in 1985, having run a nonprofit, I said, I don't know what I'm doing. So I hired this friend of mine who had worked for a gallery named Alan Schwartzman. And I paid Alan $100 to come for the day and try to explain to me, like, well, you have to inventory this, or whatever it was. That, you know, and I think Alan appreciated the $100 back then. Now that he's like a billionaire art advisor, doing the best projects in the world, I hope he remembers that. But yes, to learn how to do it, I mean, it's not an obvious business.
Yeah.
So what do you most want us Westerners to know about you and what you do? And what do you want to know from us, or me, Westerners, about what we do?
What I want from Westerns is to approach this with an open mind and not expect it to conform with the way you're used to seeing it work. the way artists work, galleries work, the business work, the government commissions, the museums, how they work and operate and acquire. So don't kind of do, this is how I did it the past 20 years. This is how you should do it. And if you're not doing it the same way I did it, then it's wrong. And you don't know what you're doing and you shouldn't be part of this. And I've heard it a lot. And I really want to ask everyone who...
You mean people come there and say, here's the playbook you have to do?
Yeah, here's the playbook. You're not applying the playbook. You don't understand.
That's interesting because I've had to force myself first in Eastern Asia. So like saying, maybe that playbook doesn't work. So I agree with you.
So that's my biggest request. Besides, buying as much as you can from our roster.
So what do you want to know from the playbook?
What do we want to know from the playbook? A lot. I think we've touched on them yesterday, but it's been very difficult engaging buyers and collectors. The most challenging, like artists are there, they're making work, very nice work, it's going to great places, but the buyers. What do you advise if we want to grow the buyers' platform and the collectors' networks?
That's interesting because I think the gatekeepers in the roles of the different critics to curators to dealers to collectors are shifted. I would say I'm a big fan of a collection in Dallas by the Rashofsky family. So they have this warehouse and all works eventually will go to the museum. That's the most important collection, I think, in America, because that's where curators go to learn for the first time about artists, whether from the shows they've done from Japan or artists from Art Povera or Italian art or whatever. And if you can get now Alan Schwartzman, again, Alan, I hate you, but I love you, helped with Howard to really build this collection. It's like to get your artists in the places where that's the brand approval, to get a show at the Rubel Museum, those kinds of things, that accelerates the growth much faster than anybody was. I worked for a couple months with Amoako Boafo starting in 2019. In between the month or two that I was dealing with him in the opening of the show at the Rubel Museum, his career was like SpaceX going up. And traditionally, a career would go like a very low rise. Mm-hmm. So you can accelerate that growth if you really focus on
placement in the right collections, shows at the right museum.
I'd put a lot of my eggs into that basket first. It's like, get to Rubel's here, get them to meet some of these artists, get Howard Rashofsky to spend 5 days here. Maybe they do. I don't know. But those people are more than, there's no Clement Greenberg anymore. So the tastemakers are either Barbara Gladstone, rest in peace, or these few collectors around the world. So I would really focus that first. If that doesn't work, then you have to go to plan C.
Close down?
No. Plan B.
Okay.
I was skipping one because you want to make that first one plan A and B.
Yeah.
I'd like to wrap up now and say I've enjoyed my time here to really try to come with an open mind to learn. And hopefully through this podcast and watch some of our panels discussion with other people in the region, this is not coming here once and finished. We all need to commit to knowledge in a way. And I hope you enjoyed our Baer Faxt podcast. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Josh.
So here we are, ending our first podcast of what we hope will be many based in the region of the Gulf. And we'd like to thank again Mohammed Hafiz for joining us. Of course, as you've heard, to Arthur Analytics for sponsoring this episode, where you can track art sales, auctions, events, emerging trends. There'll probably be some other things once they launch that they haven't even mentioned that you'll be able to track. So in today's world, you need to have access to knowledge. That's what we at the Baer Faxt say, access and knowledge. And Arthur Analytics is a great tool for accessing both. So now it's time you can check them out.
Thanks for listening to the Baer Faxt podcast. We'd like to give a big thank you to Mohammed Hafiz for joining us on this episode. Our host is Josh Baer. Our head of content is Boliang Shen. Our audio editor is Auntie Lane. And I'm Patrick Hill, associate editor. Check back soon for future episodes as we unpack the inner workings of the global art industry through exclusive, candid interviews with key players in the business, as they offer their perspectives on art and the market in the US, Asia, Europe, and beyond.